I was in Israel last week, as you well know, and watched some of the activities that took place there as a result of the Biden administration policies of appeasement with Iran and intentionally funding Iran to the tune of over $100 billion. None of this would be happening if Donald Trump were president. Iran was broke on its back and about to be overthrown by its own people. But I keep hearing our own media, news people ask, these riots, these violent people at Columbia University or other universities and in our streets and all the rest of it, who's funding these people? Who's funding these people? You know, it's a funny thing. I thought it was the job of the media to figure out the who and why, so I'll do it. And never again do I want to hear anybody in the media say, who's funding these people? First of all, I've done this before, but I'm going to do it tonight and I'm going to expand upon it. You want to know who's funding these people? The Democrat Party and the terrorist regimes. What? You have a fusion of Marxists, you have a fusion with Islamists, a complicated matrix and network of Democrat Party billionaires and millionaires and dark money, including Soros, including the Tides Foundation, among others, and you have Hamas funding, the Muslim Brotherhood, and others. Also a funding network, and Qatar, which is funding colleges and universities. In other words, the enemies of America. And this has had an enormous effect on our foreign policy toward Israel. Their attacks on Netanyahu, the goal to overthrow the Israeli government for the purpose of installing a puppet regime that will bend to the Democrat Party donors, Hamas, and the enemy of Israel, and it's all being done right in front of our eyes. And if we had a real media, you'd know a lot about it. So let me cobble this together from certain media reports and others and tell you what's taking place here. Unheard, a fantastic site. Here's a piece by Park McDonald from just a few months ago, and I can't read the whole thing. The division between the activist left and the party establishment is little more than a politically useful fiction. In reality, the radical cadres are bankrolled by the same nexus of progressive oligarchs and dark money, that is, dark money slush funds that finance the party establishment. The DNC protest, for example, was organized by two progressive Jewish NGOs, Jewish Voice for Peace, and If Not Now, the same groups behind a rowdy pre-ceasefire protest at the U.S. Capitol, at which more than 300 people were arrested. Both groups are funded by an array of big money progressive donors, including George Soros, the Rockefeller Brothers Foundation, and the Tides Network. These are charitable wings of major financial institutions as well. Part of Vanguard, Fidelity, Morgan Stanley, another group called 1630 Fund, another big group called Arabella Advisors, an umbrella group, a Democrat Party, billionaire, millionaire group, the head of the octopus that pushes monies into these organizations. Soros, of course, is the most prominent individual Democrat donor in the country. He personally spent $170 million to get Democrats elected in 2022 midterms. His nonprofit spent at least another $140 million. Arabella Advisors is less well-known, but maybe just as influential. It's run by Clinton World insider Eric Kessler. The for-profit consultancy manages a vast and opaque empire of funds and nonprofits aligned with the Democrat Party. Its role, in essence, is to allow wealthy donors to hide their donations. And they're hiding hundreds of millions of dollars worth. Scratch a nationally prominent pro-Palestinian organization, and you're likely to find Democratic oligarch money somewhere. The radicals and the Democratic establishment work together towards shared ends, even when they're fighting. This is especially true when it comes to Israel. The Biden administration's allegedly pro-Israel stance is more rhetoric than reality, a pose adopted to box critics into a corner, constrain Israel's ability to act independently of the United States, and obscure the true nature of the White House's Middle East policy. That policy, as Edward Lutwak wrote in these pages, is to fulfill Barack Obama's ill-conceived desire to distance the United States from Israel and Saudi Arabia and to reconcile with Iran. Plus, at the same time, as it is granting defense credits to Israel, the White House is also funding Iran. I want to thank our friend Charlie Kirk, who put it all together here. What are we talking about? John Kirby said the other day to Peter Doocy, we're not doing that. What are you talking about? This guy Kirby is the worst of the propagandists. $10 billion in November 2023, Biden regime approved a sanctions waiver that unlocks upwards of $10 billion in frozen funds of Iraqi payments for Iranian energy. $6 billion, September 2023, as part of a prisoner swap. Blinken ensured Iranian funds would be moved into a restricted fund for humanitarian trade. Oh, yeah, right. $10 billion. July 2023, Blinken signed a national security waiver allowing Iraq to deposit payments for Iranian energy into non-Iraqi banks in third countries instead of into restricted accounts. $3.42 billion. August 2021, the IMF sent $3.42 billion to Iran in special drawing rights. The Biden administration had the authority to stop it, but did not. 80+ billion since 2021. Iran's oil exports have surged, breaking records because the Biden administration has eased enforcement of sanctions, allowing an explosion in illicit purchases, mostly to communist China. 3.8 billion since 2021. Iran turned to the sale of petrochemicals to avoid a Trump-era sanction. Sales have surged thanks to Biden. 1.6 billion since 2021. The Trump administration imposed sanctions on Iran's steel industry, which the Biden administration has not enforced. As Kirk says, the Biden administration says its commitment to Israel is ironclad, but apparently so is its commitment to funding Iranian terrorism. Even on military matters, continues the piece, the U.S. has tried to split the difference between Israel and the Iranian axis of resistance. Since October 7, the latter, especially Iran and its prized proxy Hezbollah, has balanced vituperative criticism of Israel with claims that Hamas acted alone and demands that the U.S. restrain Israel from escalating beyond Gaza. The White House has complied, demanding that Israel not carry out any significant operations against Hezbollah in Lebanon, and leaking to the American press that it views Israel's relations to Hezbollah daily cross-border attacks as an attempt by Jerusalem to create a pretext for a wider war that could draw the U.S. in. The U.S. has, moreover, publicly backed the Iranian and Hezbollah claims that Hamas acted independently and without their knowledge on October 7, despite early public assessments from former U.S. intelligence officials that the sophistication and complexity of the attack was beyond what Hamas could do on its own. And it's now been proven that Hamas had the backing and training of Iran. The U.S., in other words, has effectively boxed Israel in. Having been struck hard by an Iranian proxy, Israel can attempt to eliminate that proxy on an accelerated timetable at the cost of massive international outrage and to limited strategic benefit. But it is being prevented by U.S. from taking any proactive measures to reestablish deterrence against Tehran, even more recently. Same thing. Now, read in this light, the oligarch-funded protests against Biden are somewhat less mysterious. They are, in fact, a useful form of kabuki. Biden pretends to be the best friend of Israel, that is, Israel has ever had, while the left pretends to hate him for it. Both sides benefit. For Biden, pressure from the left gives him leverage to turn around to the Israelis and say, you better listen to me, or I'll have to cave to my party's flank, while offering his party's Jewish and pro-Israel voters a show of the president's resolute commitment to the Jewish state, even as he courts Iran. And this pose is especially important in justifying the latter policy, since Americans remain overwhelmingly supportive of Israel and overwhelmingly hostile toward Iran and its terrorist proxies. The left, meanwhile, gets to demonstrate its principled independence from the Democratic establishment while setting the stage to extract concessions within the party and party-adjacent bureaucracies, set-asides for Arab, Palestinian, and Muslim staffers, a national strategy to counter Islamophobia, presumably be administered by professional anti-Islamophobia activists, and a general resetting of the Overton window for the next round of conflict. Plus, there's the continued channeling of nominally anti-system energies into a web of party-controlled nonprofits, which has already proven themselves adept at redirecting the righteous anger of America's radicals into a never-ending jihad against racists, MAGA extremists, and other deplorables. Well, what else do we have? December 7, 2023, from Fox. A nonprofit that has received donations from George Soros has been bankrolling groups who have hosted pro-Palestinian rallies, according to a watchdog group. The nonprofit San Francisco-based Tides Foundation has been given over $22 million from different causes The Tides Foundation has then given millions to liberal organizations who have all organized pro-Palestinian protests, according to the Capital Research Center. Democrat Party, Democrat front groups, Democrat dark money, Soros, other Democrat billionaires and multimillionaires funding what you're seeing in the streets, as well as the Hamas funding network, as well as Qatar in our colleges and universities. Washington Free Beacon. Look at this. Community Justice Exchange, part of the Soros-funded Tides Foundation, solicits legal defense donations for arrested protesters. The protests, which took place in dozens of U.S. cities, including San Francisco, Chicago, New York City, Philadelphia, were organized by A15 Action, a newly formed group that worked to coordinate a multi-city economic blockade on April 15 in solidarity with Palestine, quote unquote. The group's website directs users to a bail and legal defense fund hosted through Act Blue, the Democratic Party's online fundraising juggernaut. Shutting down bridges, getting into tunnels, all these things at disruption are funded by wealthy Democrats through dark money and front groups. Those who donate to the fund, Act Blue page says, are sending money to the Community Justice Exchange, which provides, quote, money bail, court fees, fines, and other legal services to community-based organizations. The exchange is a project of the Tides Center, a left-wing dark money network funded by Soros and other left-wing billionaires. The protesters who organized the global event under the Title A15 targeted economic choke points, with the express purpose of causing as much financial disruption as possible, according to their website. And it goes on. Your man Soros. Washington Free Beacon. October 18, 2023, Chuck Ross. Hundreds of protesters with Jewish Voice for Peace, and If Not Now, INN, infiltrated the Capitol to call on the Israeli government to issue a ceasefire in response to Hamas terrorist attacks on Israel. We refuse to stand by as the Israeli government commits genocide against Palestinians in Gaza, said Jewish Voice for Peace, which calls itself the largest progressive Jewish anti-Zionist organization in the world. It's Marxist and pro-Islamist. And the protest comes as anti-Israel pro-Hamas groups call on lawmakers to pressure Israel to end retaliatory strikes against Hamas strongholds in Gaza. The Council on American Islamic Relations. This is a Hamas front group that was created in Philadelphia, funded by Hamas, that has as its purpose to pretend it's a moderate civil rights Muslim organization with representation in our media, in the Biden administration, in the Democrat Party, a complete front group. More, look at this, Washington Free Beacon. The son of left-wing mega donor George Soros has visited the White House at least 20 times since Biden has been president. This is a year old, so it's more than that. Alex Soros, who recently took over his father's Open Society Foundation, it funds progressive organizations. I hate this word progressive. It's Marxist organizations and Islamist organizations. Has held meetings with several senior White House advisors. He was named the new head of the foundation in June, announcing he's more political than his 92-year-old father. Open Society pours millions of dollars in the Democratic organization to help elect radical progressive prosecutors who are overseeing rising crime in American cities, like the one who's trying to put Donald Trump in prison as I speak. Now, Soros Alex is known for his connections with high-level Democrats. He's posted photos with Biden, Harris, Pelosi, and the like. There's more. The New York Post. The pro-Palestinian protests over the last months, where tens of thousands of the U.S. have chanted for the end of Israel, not merely a story of organic rage. They are also funded in large part by an uber-wealthy American-born tech entrepreneur, Neville Singham, and his wife, Jody Evans. Since 2017, Singham has been the main funder of the People's Forum, which has co-organized at least 4 protests after 1,200 innocents were murdered in Israel. He's done more than that. A review of public disclosure forms shows that the multimillionaire Singham and his wife Evans have donated over $20.4 million to the People's Forum from 2017 to 2022 through a series of shell organizations and donor advisory groups accounting for nearly all the group's funding. It goes on. Singham is more than just a Marxist with deep pockets. He is also a China sympathizer who lives in Shanghai and has close ties to at least 4 propaganda news sites that boost the Chinese Communist Party's image abroad, the Times reported. And it goes on. Born to a Cuban mother and a Sri Lankan father in 1954, Singham grew up steeped in far-left politics. His father, Archibald Singham, worked as a professor of political science at Brooklyn College and was the first scholar in residence at the New York State Martin Luther King Jr. Institute for Nonviolence in Albany. When he was 17, he joined the radical Marxist group and labor union League of Revolutionary Black Workers. And the following year, according to a 2021 blog by Singham, quote, like all disciplined cadre, I went to work in the factory. 1974, the FBI investigated him as potentially dangerous because of background emotional instabilities or activity in groups engaged in policies inimical to the United States, according to its report, which he published on his blog, and it goes on. Wow, what a matrix of network of billionaires, all Democrats, every damn one of them. And I went over this report before. The Hamas network in America came out last October. It was put out by a program on extremism at George Washington University. Hamas supporters have long operated in the United States. Internal Hamas documents and FBI wiretaps introduced as evidence in various criminal cases clearly show the existence of nationwide Hamas network. Hamas is part of the Muslim Brotherhood. That's that umbrella operation of terrorist Islamists. Clearly show the existence of a nationwide Hamas network engaged in fundraising, lobbying, education, and propaganda dissemination dating back to the 1980s. The network formalized its existence in 1988 when it created the Palestine Committee in the U.S. The committee's goals included, quote, increasing the financial and moral support for Hamas, fighting surrendering solutions, and politicizing the savagery of the Jews, quote unquote. The committee spawned several public-facing organizations, much of which are based out of Chicago, Dallas, and Washington. They included an all-purpose Islamic Association of Palestine, the financial arm represented by the Occupied Land Fund and the former Holy Land Foundation, and it creates think tanks, and it founded CARE. Individuals and networks providing various forms of support for Hamas have been active in America for decades. Small numbers of Palestinians who belong to the Muslim Brotherhood networks in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, in fact, arrived in the U.S. since the 1960s to study at American universities, or immigrants, refugees, and so forth. And it goes on in great detail. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this is in the public record. It goes on and on. Here we have from the ADL, it's finally gotten off its ass and doing its job, a list of a number of the groups that have been formed that are doing what you see in the streets. And I just want to be clear. I've been at the forefront, the point of the spear, making the point that we have a fusion between American Marxists and Islamists. They're coordinating together, they're working together, they're funding together, and it is the Democrat Party that's overseeing all of it. And you can see the change in the Biden administration when it comes to Israel and the phony declarations about how he has Israel's back while he's sending over $100 billion directly and indirectly to Iran. He hasn't stopped that. Well, he's telling Israel, you're not to go on offense. Why is man Blinken, who is a Marxist ideologue, that's what he is. Go ahead and look it up. Look it up. It's out there. It's in the public record. He hires Robert Malley, a special pleader for Iran, who brings in individuals who are back-channeling with the foreign minister of Iran to negotiate for us on the nuclear deal. That's what's going on, ladies and gentlemen. That's who's funding the protest. This is who the people are. Now, media, report it. And stop wondering why.
Hey, Sean Hannity here. Hey, click here to subscribe to Fox News YouTube page and catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis. You will not get it anywhere else.